Here's where I knew I had made a mistake. I'm walking down, and I hear the following. The first person says, okay, I attack you. And the second person goes, wait. In response to your declaration of attack, I remove my pants. 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 I remove my and I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh, hello, and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I'm your host, Andy, and I'm here with my co-host. He's unstoppable. He's unflappable. He's full of unimaginable wit and intelligence. Don't feed him a banana, or he might get unruly. Anthony Maddox.
That banana thing sounds a little weird, but I don't like bananas. That's fine.
You might get unruly if someone feeds you a banana. It'd be weird if someone force-fed you a banana. You wouldn't like that.
I would just be ungrateful.
Nicely done. And they say that improv's only for professionals.
Do they?
This week on the show, Anthony, we are talking about uncards. Cards from the joke magic sets. Unglued, unhinged, unsanctioned, and upcoming... Ooh, what's the new one called?
Unfinity.
Thank you. That's actually a pretty funny name. That one does make me chuckle a little bit. We're going to talk about those cards and what they mean for Cube. Anthony's got some notes prepared. I'm not sure where we're going with this, but I'm excited to find out. Before we do that, though, Anthony, I have prepared a Pack One Pick One for us from a listener-submitted cube that does feature some silver-bordered cards. This cube comes to us from listener Magic. It's probably Magic. And it is a casual, lower-powered cube inspired by fairy tale, storybooks, and Dungeons & Dragon themes. It is designed to be played in a 40-card brawl format with 2 to 4 players, so up to a 4-player table. So keep that in mind while drafting. We also start with 25 life in this cube, which is cool. I'll take 5 extra life. And we also get 4 packs of 15 for the draft, so quite a few cards to look at. And a few ways this cube is deviating from the expected. The pack is Conclave Mentor, Fae of Wishes, Fairy Guide Mother, Latchkey Fairy, Warren Weirding, Seraphic Greatsword, Pippa, Duchess of Dice, Mimic, Goblin Crater Maker, Targ Nar, Demon Fang Knoll, Component Pouch, Yuan T. Malison, is that right? Gadrak, the Crown Scourge, Karametrus Acolyte, and Frogify. If nothing else, that felt like a tongue twister of a pack. A lot of names there that I fear I may have mispronounced.
Same. There's a bunch of cards here that I have not read in quite some time.
Well,
we got dice rolling, we got big, splashy legendary creatures, we have fairy adventures.
Well, what are you going to pick, Anthony?
It's a slow one. I got to do a bunch of reading here. So we do have one silver-bordered card here in this pack in Pippa, Duchess of Dice. I think this card's actually very cool. So it's a 3-mana 2/2. You can pay 3 and tap it to roll a 6-sided die. It becomes a green die creature token with power and toughness equal to its result. You can also pay 2 and a blue and re-roll any die. There's a lot going on here. I think I want to just shortcut this to it's a 3-mana 2/2 that you can pay 3 and tap and make a 3.5. 3.5, I think, is the average.
That would be the average, yeah.
And sometimes it'll get better, sometimes it'll get worse, but especially in a multiplayer environment, that kind of repeated value and a mana sink, I think, is going to be really valuable. The other thing I'm looking at is Gadrak. This is just a big, powerful creature that spits out a bunch of treasures, right? Am I remembering that right? Yeah. And that kind of ramp, having just a big, flying, threatening body, I think all adds up to a pretty powerful package.
Yeah, Gadrak, the Crown Scourge, is 2 and a red for a legendary creature dragon. It's got flying. It's 5/4. It can't attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts. At the beginning of your end step, you create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. Text, but it is a big dragon, so kind of a powerful card.
I think in the spirit of this cube, though, I am interested in trying out Pippa, and I'd be really excited to see if that actual second ability of being able to re-roll dice comes up. We do see another card here that cares about dice roll from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, so there could actually be really high upside on that.
I think I'm going to be substantially more boring here, and probably just take Goblin Crater Maker? You think that's a mistake?
I do think that's a mistake. Yeah, in a multiplayer format. Like, this card's
That's
flexible,
true. It is a
but
multiplayer
it's
format.
small.
I forgot it was multiplayer for a moment. Yeah, what the heck? I'm taking Pippa too.
Hell yeah.
We're talking about uncards, Anthony. It's time to do some silver bordered nonsense, and in this case, make creatures of an unpredictable size.
This card does also tilt me a little bit, though, because as we've talked about before, I really hate when people use dice as tokens because, you can't tell when they're tapped or untapped. It's easy to lose track of them. And this one is just like making that joke of, no, this is the way you do it for this card.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this one could be blackboarded if not for that blue ability, which says reroll any die. And the rules text, reminder text there says, activate this ability only anytime it makes sense, which of course is not.
It's perfect. I love that reminder text.
Now, do you think that means you can just reroll any of the creatures in play whenever you want?
Yeah, of course.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I guess there's still die on the table. Like if it said roll a die and then make a token with power and toughness equal to the result, then you would be able to reroll that die at will. But given that the die is just sitting on the table, some combat trick nonsense could happen there.
I don't know how often you actually use that ability on the dice tokens because, if you're blocking my 1/1 with a 2/2, do I really want to try and reroll that to kill your creature? Maybe I do, but I also might just make a brand new die creature. So I know I'm getting that value back. I don't know.
It seems like it would be rare to do that. And does rerolling the die cause the creature to leave the battlefield and re-enter the battlefield such that, like, if you target it with a removal spell, you just re-roll it and it fizzles the removal spell?
That doesn't make any sense.
I mean, you have to take it. You have to pick it up off the table.
If you pick up a card off the table to read it, does it leave play?
If it says,
does it gain flying
when
you pick up a
roll
card?
the card, I don't know. I feel like it might. We're touching a little bit on the complexity of uncards already.
We just have to consult with Mark Rosewater, the rules manager for all uncards.
Yes. Thank you for sending in your cube magic. We appreciate it. It's a very cool cube. I think people should go check it out. It is a little bit off the beaten path, and I like all of the brazen adjustments to the drafting rules you have made to make your cube play better for you. So, bravo. On to our main topic, uncards. What has brought on this renewed interest in uncards for you?
I've always been really interested in uncards. Maybe I should provide a little bit of context on sort of where I'm coming from. I'm not an uncard fanatic. I'm not the person that has the old. That is not true at all. Is that true?
No,
it might be true.
It's not true.
I don't know what you think of me. However, I do think that they are a really, really interesting aspect of the game. They just let Wizards of the Coast do something totally different with the game than they can with other sets. Do a lot of innovation. And I think what it lets us do as players and people that are interested in the design of the game is question a lot of the things that we take for granted by looking at this thing that totally breaks the rules that we might not have realized were in place at all can sort of become pretty obvious. So I really think that even if you are also not a person that is all about silverboard cards, if you're a pretty serious Magic player, there might be something to learn just in sort of digging into what these sets are all about. And maybe you'll even find a few gems that you think that even if you have some qualms about adding silverboard cards to your cube, maybe this might actually make a little bit of sense.
I guess you couldn't, like, let's say theoretically someone was using a dice to keep track of their life total. You couldn't re-roll that because it was never rolled, right?
No.
That wouldn't make any sense.
That wouldn't make sense. You also can't re-roll, let's say, the die you rolled to start the game. It's only die that you're rolling.
You could
Nope.
If Pippa was somehow in play before the game began, couldn't you?
She's not.
I mean, this is the world of uncards. You never know.
So, Wizards just announced the newest unset, Unfinity, which I'm really excited for. There's also a lot else in there. I'm really excited for the borderless Shocklands. I think they look amazing. But that has given us an opportunity to finally talk about this topic, which I scrolled down in my list of notes, and this was literally the first notes at the bottom. So this is something I've been wanting us to dig into for a long time.
Where should we start then?
So I want to talk a little bit about the history and what uncards are.
Mark Rosewater's little pet project, because he used to be a comedy writer and now he just gets to make jokes sometimes.
Great, so we got that covered. Then I want to go into some of the different types of uncards, because there are actually a few pretty discrete categories, and I think understanding sort of why things are uncards versus regular blackboarded cards can sort of let you sort through that much easier and say, like, okay, well, there's this slice that's actually not interesting to me, but here's this different slice that actually could potentially be interesting. And then maybe talk a little bit about sort of what are some of the considerations if you're a cube designer, why you might want to include these or not, some of the problems and potential advantages.
All right, we'll start us off with the history then. From whence do uncards come?
So they came from this really specific sort of prompt within the design team. They said, what if we could make a set of cards that didn't have to abide by all the restrictions that apply to tournament legal cards. Basically, there's some limitations in the design space because we want people to play this game in a serious context where they're caring about their results and their rankings. But that means we can't do certain kind of really fun things. They just sort of, like you implied, or said specifically, gave it to Mark Rosewater and said, hey, what do you think we could do with this? Are there things that we can really explore if we remove that restriction of having things not be playable in tournaments?
But to be clear, the prompt was not, we want to make funny jokes and be cute about it. It was like, what is anything that is not tournament legal we could do? And Mark Rosewater's response to that prompt was humor. We don't really do humor for the most part in Magic, so that can be a major component of this set of cards that are otherwise not going to be played in tournaments.
That's definitely a big part of it. I mean, the first sets just went in so many weird directions, and there's so many bizarre cards. So the way it evolved, it did sort of turn into what a lot of people ended up thinking of as just like the joke set or like a silly set. But when Mark was envisioning this, it really, and I would definitely recommend anyone go listen to the source, go listen to a bunch of
the 45 episodes of Draft to Work all about the various unsets.
Yep.
There's a lot of them.
A lot of what we're going to be talking about, you could and probably should just go listen to those instead, but we'll add our 2 cents on top of it.
So anyway...
But what he envisioned was not this sort of like product that was a totally separate thing. Like, he just thought, well, most Magic is casual Magic. A very, very small minority of actual games of Magic that are played are tournament games, right? So these were really just like real Magic cards because most people in most contexts could play them. But it was sort of seen, I think, partly maybe because of that like really distinct visual style as just like, well, this is just the joke set. These aren't real cards. They're outside of a little bit of like limited play, not really getting played that much. And I think that's really kind of disappointing because, these are sets that people have put a ton of work and, design time and creative time to make them what they are. And for them to sort of be dismissed is really kind of sad. And I mean, I would just think about it. If this was designed as a separate game from scratch, you wouldn't say, oh, well, that's not a game, or, that's not real because it has this joke in it. Like, I think it's just that because there's such like strong expectations and stigma about how Magic is played that they did get dismissed a little bit.
I hear you, but also Munchkins is a game with a bunch of jokes in it, and I don't count it as a real game. It's awful.
Wow.
I really don't like Munchkins.
I like to play Munchkin because it makes you miserable.
I hate it so much. Do you like to play Munchkins, but not me, though, so I'm not there to be made miserable.
I've enjoyed Munchkin.
Okay.
I don't know if I want to play it.
Ever again? Ever again?
It's a fine game. So, in addition to these core unsets where they just get to go wild and sort of explore all the different kinds of mechanics that wouldn't work for one reason or another in a tournament context, we also have a few other things that I think sort of fall into this category. There are some holiday cards and there are promotional cards that, whether they have silver borders or not, sort of still fall into this category of cards that you can't play necessarily in tournaments.
Even in Vintage. No Stalking Tiger in Vintage.
Stalking Tiger is a real card? Oh, Stalking Tiger.
Stalking Tiger.
That's the one, yes. We also have things like the Conspiracies and the Draft Matter sets that are also from those conspiracy sets, which they're not actually uncards, but I think that a lot of this sort of conversation makes sense and applies to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, to your point of people not taking uncards seriously, the Conspiracies are the same in the sense that they were made in a context where they couldn't BC play in normal tournament Magic. Conspiracy was never going to be drafted at a competitive level. And so they broke a lot of rules there, and those cards are also not legal in Vintage or whatever. And yet, I think people take those more seriously, perhaps because of the black border and the lack of jokes, than they do uncards.
And that's kind of disappointing because I think we should take jokes seriously. I think humor is really important.
It's very funny to take jokes extremely seriously.
We should.
So serious.
Here's the big question. Should you put uncards in your cube? Maybe here's a different question.
Are you asking me personally?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Should I?
Should one put silver bordered cards in their cube?
I mean, if they want to, of course. I mean, people that listen to this podcast know that our stance is do whatever you want. It's your cube. The whole point is that it's no rules, baby. Parents are out of town. No rules.
So, different question. Should you not put uncards in your cube?
Some of them are awful.
Some of them are awful.
Some of them
I
are
want to talk about some
awful game design pieces that I don't think anybody should put in their cube unless they aim to make people unhappy.
Which we've also seen that as a cube design goal. So, anything can happen. I would just say there is a lot of interesting cards here. There's a lot of interesting design space explored, and you legitimately can't really play these cards in a lot of other places. Like, I think
That's true.
Similarly, If you want to put them in your commander deck, if you're saying, well, I have my card that cares about does your creature have a hat or not, cool. As long as like the rules around it are sensible and we can work it out, I'm totally okay with that. But I get that for most players, putting a silver bordered card into their commander deck is probably not an option.
This is not the conversation to have right now, but the whole like rule zero thing around EDH is like doesn't really pan out in reality in most of the time. Like people are not building decks to play with like a very known group of people, and so they don't want to like have to sit down and have a whole conversation every time before they play a game. Like, is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I do that? So I think in reality, most people don't put them in their EDH decks, even though they could, of course.
Right. So the one place that you really do have an opportunity to play with these cards that, you know, again, if they're just like fun game pieces you might want to, is in Cube and similar sort of sandbox formats. And in addition to just being a place where you can play them, it really is a place that lets you, you know, slice out just the aspects that are interesting for you and potentially, you know, exclude other cards that might introduce complex rules interaction. So it's also a place where you can really make them functional and make them shine.
And the foils are largely very cheap, except for some of the like old school foils.
I don't know if that's true anymore.
Even like
a day passed, so who knows?
No, I would be shocked to hear if any of the unsanctioned foils were more than a buck or two. I'd be very surprised.
All right, we got a Blast from the Past is $80
I said unsanctioned.
Oh, well.
I said not including the old ones. Blast from the Past, very expensive. Dr. Richard Garfield, PhD, very expensive.
Unsanctioned is also the smaller set that...
What am I thinking of?
You're thinking of Unstable.
I'm thinking of Unstable.
Foil Urza Academy Headmaster is $40.
Okay, I'm wrong. Yeah, Foil Earl of Squirrel, $84.
Whoa.
The most expensive Unstable card. Then some basic lands. Steam Flogger Boss, still $62.
Wait, I see $4. Are you looking at the promo Earl of Squirrel?
Looking at the foil. According to the MTG Goldfish, his price is just wrong.
Huh. Anyway,
apparently the TCG player market price for a foil Earl of Squirrel is $4.16. The TCG player mid price for a foil Earl of Squirrel is $83.22.
So you're saying as soon as we started recording this podcast, Earl of Squirrel got bought out?
I don't think I'm saying that.
You're saying that my basement is bugged, and there are other podcasters that are they're listening to our trend-setting information, and they're buying out foil Earls of Squirrels.
I think I'm saying that some of these pricing algorithms are sus at best. Okay, they're mostly cheap. Apparently, I'm not entirely correct about them being all very cheap. But anyway, you can pimp out your Uncubes pretty affordably, in my experience.
All right, let's dive into some of the different types of cards. This is not a perfect, exhaustive, or comprehensive set of attributes like so many descriptors, so I don't want to see anybody out there saying, oh, is this a physical challenge or is this a joke? Like, every card's going to have a little bit, but I think that these are pretty good categories, and again, will just be a useful framework for thinking about what kinds of different cards you're looking at. Every card that's in a silverboard set has to be basically not possible for them to print in a normal, standard legal black border set in one way or another. And there's a couple different discrete ways that cards can be sort of not black border. The first and a big one is just that there are parts of cards that are just not mechanically meaningful, and in a normal Magic set, you can't make cards care about or interact with. So we're talking about things like the illustration and the artist, the number of lines of text and the flavor text, the rarity, all kinds of things where if a card gets reprinted, all of those things can change. Mm-hmm. So you don't want people going out and being like, oh, well, I'm going to a tournament and I want to make sure I get the, the rendition of my Death Shadow that doesn't have a hat, because everyone knows about that famous printing of Death Shadow that has a hat, because there's some powerful removal spell which only destroys cards with hats. Like, that's just not something that they're going to do in a normal game of Magic, because it's not a part of the game that they want to be part of tournament play, just like we're saying why these cards exist.
Weirdly, though, this is to dig into like the deep history of Magic. So now the rule is that like nothing can care about anything that like might change in the printing of a card, or like in the localization of a card, you change a different language or something, or you have promo versions of different art. But there was, in the very early days of Magic, cards that, for example, destroyed all the cards from the Homelands expansion, and I'm not actually sure.
And no one was upset about that card.
No one cared about that, and didn't have any impact on any kind of competitive play whatsoever. I don't actually know how those have been eroded, or if they just banned and everything. What do they do to those cards?
That's a great question. I think they still just exist.
It's actually not a great question. It's kind of silly. Maybe
matter. But I think that you are bringing up a great point that Magic has changed a lot over these years. So some things you will definitely be able to find a counterexample to things we're talking about here, but most likely Magic has moved on. Chaos Orb exists. We know about it. We don't need to talk about it that much.
Yeah, I actually kind of like this category too, because I feel like sometimes a lot of these otherwise like incidental or superficial things do actually relate to something about the card. Like, I would bet if you were to look across all of Magic, that lines of rules text on a similarly costed creature would probably somewhat correlate with the card's power level. Just, I think more complex cards are more powerful, and so you have cards that care about lines of text. It's kind of like caring about power level, kind of, in some ways. Like, oftentimes you get these uncards that are somewhat proxies for a different thing.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And within the normal rules of Magic, we only have so many ways to sort of interact with and, make more conditional or situational effects that add sort of interesting diversity. So you could say, destroy target creature with high power, or destroy target creature with high mana value, or things like that. And having just another axis is actually kind of interesting.
For sure.
And really, this is a meaningful difference, or this is an interesting aspect to talk about for a cube, because you can't print those effects, because especially, somebody just happens to be speaking a different language, and in German, all the card text is much longer, so this card gets much more powerful if you happen to be playing
Destroy
German.
Target German opponent.
All German creatures happen to be wordy. Interesting. But in the context of cube, you are most often, unless you're designing a cube for Magic Online or Arena, you're playing with physical cards, playing at your local card shop or at your house. These rules are completely resolvable. You can count the number of lines. Yeah, they're self-contained, and these aspects of the cards you can often control as well. So, we've played Uncube where somebody specifically says, well, I want my selfie preservation to only be able to fetch forests and mountains untapped, or, whatever the rules. So I'll just get forests and mountains that have trees in them, so that you can actually shape the way that cards work, or deliberately choose artists. So you can actually tune the way these cards work, which I think is super interesting and not totally unreasonable. In the same way that tribal mechanics, we have that type line that mechanically on its own doesn't mean anything, but other cards can care about, is really similar to, caring about, is there a hat in the illustration?
Yeah, you could think about, is there a hat in the illustration, and just change that to any other line of text, right? Like, that is just like a Doomblade that only cares about whatever. I'm not putting this eloquently, but you've said it much better than I did. But yes, it's just another, like, once it's in your cube, all of the like mystery and like what will this kill, what won't this kill is removed. You can look at the list and see, here's the things it kills, here's the things it doesn't kill, if it's a kill spell or whatever, and just say whether or not this effect is balanced and something you want a card to be able to do, to kill these creatures and not these creatures. And the fact that it cares about an illustration is irrelevant. Like, it's fine, because it's in a sandboxed environment where you are total control over all of the actual targets.
Yeah, so a couple that I think are pretty interesting along these lines. We have Aesthetic Consultation. So this is 1 black mana for an instant. Name an artist. Remove the top 6 cards of your library from the game, then reveal the cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card by that named artist and put it into your hand. Then exile the other removed cards. So this is just, again, a way that it does create a lot of work for you to care about what artists there are, but if there's, 2 or 3 targets you're likely to want to hit, you can... This is actually potentially a very powerful spell, and as a cube designer, again, you could do weird stuff with lands to make this a meaningful and interesting interaction. Maybe even better, I like this Abstract Iguanart. This is 2 mana for a 1/1, an art lizard. And whenever you cast a spell, note the first letter of its artist's name. If that letter wasn't already noted, put a 1/1 counter on Abstract Iguanart. So it's this snowballing Tarmogoyf that doesn't care about card types in graveyard. It cares about spells that you've cast. And
yeah, that's basically, is there a card that just grows for every spell you've cast? I know there are cards that grow for creature spells and for non-creature spells, but it's basically, for most applications, going to be pretty much something that just grows every time you cast a spell for the first few spells, but has this interesting rider on it.
Right. And I think this one might actually be the most interesting to you. Rare Begone. Have you seen this spell?
Oh boy, have I seen Rare Begone. The only Uncube you and I have played in person, unless you've been playing other Uncubes behind my back, is an Uncube where the designer went so far, had like a bunch of promo versions of cards that didn't have rarity symbols on them because of promo versions. And so they went so far as to mark all of the inner sleeves with the cards that were rares, so they would be removed by Rare Begone, just to balance it a little more. So yes, I'm familiar with Rare Begone.
But like you're saying, so what this does, it's 4 mana sorcery, and it causes all players to sacrifice all rare permanents and discard all rare cards. And like you're saying, with just having a unique effect that cares about the power level of spells, the idea of, well, I'm going to build this deck that's all about commons and uncommons, and then be able to just completely break the symmetry on this and completely destroy my opponent's hand with Rare Begone, definitely is a interesting and meaningful interaction.
I wish I could put a Rare Begone at the end of all of my actual booster draft decks, because I'm notorious for never taking rares. I think I should take them more highly. But listeners to this podcast will know that I love consistency. I love cheap spells. And so it's hard to get me to take a rare in a regular draft. And I always get to the end and have frankly, I have a 2-1 deck made of uncommons and commons is what I always end up with. And didn't rare draft or money draft anything. So if I could just have a rare be gone at the end, it would be very helpful.
Is rare be gone a rare? I don't even know.
I hope so.
It has the rarity symbol crossed out.
Oh,
who can say? Probably doesn't matter unless you have 2 in your cube.
Yeah.
So I think this is pretty interesting. It's obviously a space that mechanically works. The biggest drawback here, which I also think is part of the fun, is especially with the illustration effects, it can be a little bit difficult to tell, like, oh, well, this knight's wearing a helmet. Does that count as a hat? There can definitely be some disagreement. And that's where I think you really want to sort of have the some awareness of the context and what your play group is like and what kind of experience you're looking for, because I think those moments can actually be a lot of fun when you're arguing about, well, how many of these creatures actually have hats? I'm sorry, I'm just sticking with this example. It can be disruptive and confusing and frustrating if you are trying to, have a very serious game where the outcome is important. But if you're having a more fun, casual environment, that can actually be part of the fun.
If I were to have a cube that had uncards in it that had non-deterministic outcomes where people could disagree on something, I would probably include in the rules of my cube something like any rules disagreements about uncards are settled by the rest of the table by a vote or something like that. Just so there's some codified way where it's like, if you and your opponent disagree on something, it's not just who's got more charisma and is more stubborn that wins. It's, put to some other vote.
Yeah, I like that. And not just having to go through and make a list of all of the cards, whether or not they meet every single requirement.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't do that.
All right, the next type of card that we have, I think this is going to be more controversial, is physical challenge cards. So this is a big part, like we mentioned, that Magic used to have sort of things like Falling Star and Chaos Orb, where you had to do something physically, like Dexterity is also what you might call these cards. And they all just ask you to do something physically with your body outside the game. So whether that's throwing cards or rolling dice onto cards or crawling under the table to play an extra sub-game or using your hand to represent a token, these, I'm going to be honest, are not the most interesting aspect. I think that if you're going to the really extreme side of having that like fun party environment, you're having snacks and drinks with your friends while you're playing your Uncube, these definitely can add a lot of interesting variety and spice to that experience, and like really exciting, joyful moments of, I threw my slaying mantis across the table and I missed and, totally whiffed the game because of that, to steal an example again from Mark Rosewater. So there is like an extreme and a place where those can be a lot of fun. I think a lot of these do break down if you're trying to be very serious and spiky about it, because the optimal way to play these is often
not in the spirit of them. Yeah, I'm not interested in any of the dexterity cards. And on top of everything you mentioned, it does also potentially make your cube less accessible. I mean, there are people that might not be able to crawl under the table or, whatever. Maybe only have one good hand to hold their cards with. Now the other card that requires them to keep their hand on the table is just going to really mess them up. And unless you're really careful, that's really not a particularly welcoming experience to craft with your own environment.
So yeah, I think that it's definitely worth considering. A lot of these are just, I think a lot of them are well-written, humorous cards that are, I appreciate them, but they're not something that I'm going to be putting into any of my cubes in the near future.
Yep.
Next up, we have cards that care about something outside the game. So these are cards where just the card itself is not actually contained, but it cares about the environment. So that could be cards like Heirloom Wrangler, which cares about whether or not your opponent is wearing jeans. It has Denim Walk.
Also kind of non-deterministic. I've seen people fight over whether or not the pants they're wearing are jeans.
And famously, some people have taken off their pants.
That is true.
That could be for you or not.
I like you. Hold priority during your end of the first main phase before you go to combat. Or wait for them to attack, then hold priority during declare blockers, then take your pants off and block.
Perfect. So is that for you? That's a question that you have to answer. We have Blurry Beeble, which is unblockable if you're wearing glasses. Spike Tournament Grinder, which fetches cards from outside the game. Although now with alchemy, that's a thing that happens in Magic anyway now. Old Fashioned Vampire, that it's bigger at night when it's dark outside, which is... It's very cool. Like it's a card which you can evaluate. It works. Again, there might be some disagreement about how dark outside is dark, but the fact that you're just like, oh, it's nighttime during the draft, and you realize, oh, this card is actually quite powerful right now. This is one that I actually remember just enjoying a lot during Unstable because it was really good at night. So I like a lot of these cards, especially some of the prop ones can be a lot of fun where it's like, here's my cube and I'm opening up my fancy box and I have the Nerf darts for the Nerf Blaster game. And here's the sheet of cards that go with Urza Academy Headmaster. And here's the binder of cards you're allowed to use with Spike. Like that can be a really sort of delightful experience to have all these props. Some of the other ones that get a little bit more extreme, I'm not so into. Again, my focus when evaluating cards for Cube, especially these uncards, which have sort of a huge range of effects, is are you still allowing players to make meaningful decisions if some of your players are trying to be spikes about it?
Yeah, it's just optimal to take your pants off with Hurloon Wrangler. It's not an interesting
Right.
decision. It doesn't present you with any interesting decisions unless you went commando that day. Then you do have an interesting decision to make.
That is an interesting decision. So the question I would really ask there is, how much are you and your players trying to optimize these experiences? And what does optimal look like in each of those cases? If I'm going to a Cube night and everyone else has shown up with their, wearing the right pants and making sure they have some glasses so that they can block the blurry Beeble, I don't want to be thinking ahead about a game of Magic that much and in that way. So that's not really for me.
Yeah.
But some of these that are a little bit more self-contained, I think are definitely pretty interesting.
A small tangent here, but this kind of reminds me, we talk all the time on the show about how your goal as a game designer or cube designer is often to make the fun thing the good thing, right? Like that's
Right.
one of Mark Rosewatter's main points. And it really kind of highlights when you start thinking about these cards and optimizing them, how impressive it is that Magic is this big, complicated game with all these moving pieces and all these parts and all these game pieces and different kinds of decks and just infinity combinations of ways cards can be combined into decks and decks can be combined into matchups and matchups can be combined into tournaments. And yet, with everybody just trying to win, not at all trying to have fun, the result is still fun. Like that, in some ways, it's kind of amazing. Like it's kind of amazing that there isn't some really boring deck to play that no one likes, but is actually just the best deck, and it happens all the time in different standard metas. Like Magic is just kind of inherently a fun game. I don't know. It's a small shout out to just Magic, I guess. Magic's a good game. It's impressive that trying to optimize any of these uncards very often turns into not very fun. And having played at EDH tables where some people are trying to optimize their EDH deck, that is also frankly not very fun for most people unless everyone's on the exact same page and the exact same budget or proxy policy or whatever. And so it's impressive to me that Magic in the broadest sense, with everybody trying to optimize it, still remains fun.
Does it though?
Yeah, sure.
No, I'm with
As
you.
long as you're not playing
It's
on Arena.
a very solid game. So next up, we have Outside Assistance. This is arguably sort of similar, but there's a set of cards that specifically care about bringing other people into the game, which is pretty similar to bringing in, props or caring about external factors, but it's a very distinct kind of gameplay, so I think it's worth thinking about separately. So we have cards like Better Than One, where you bring a person from outside the game and they become your teammate. You actually split your deck in half and give them half the deck. There's a whole bunch of cards that care about getting high fives, and you want to run around the room and see how many high fives you can get. And I think similarly, if you're going for that kind of experience where there are going to be other people around, so it's not going to be too disruptive, there can just be some unique and really exciting and just fun moments of just getting to do weird things and involving people in a different way in the game.
Yeah, I gotta say, I maybe have drafted Unstable twice in my life. I have never drafted Unhinged or...
You're a Scrooge.
No, I've never... I wasn't going to say that at all. Fuck you. I've never drafted Unhinged or Unglued, because they are very old and expensive now to buy packs of those. Most of my exposure to playing these uncards in drafted environments is through what was at once an annual holiday wacky draft, which has been sidelined by COVID for the past 2 years. But we notoriously have gotten in the past in our local play group upwards of 40 people together to do one big draft. And I mean one big draft all around one draft table where everyone brings their own packs. And there's always a handful of unpacks in those drafts. And so it's not uncommon to see in the middle of round one, somebody sprinting around the table trying to get as many high fives as they can around this giant table in 10 or 15 seconds or whatever it is for their removal spell that cares about high fives. And those are fun moments in that context because nobody is showing up to the holiday wacky draft with 40 people at one table and saying, this is a very serious competitive event that I care about winning. Though people do try to do their best, they come up to have fun. And so the fact that these uncards are kind of throwing just a little bit of that fun into there is always a great part of that experience.
At the last one, I'm not a person that likes to sing. I'm not a person that can sing at all. But I had a card called Land Aid, which was a rampant growth. But if you sing a song while you're fetching, it comes in untapped. And I don't know if it was fun for me, but it was definitely fun for other people to force me to sing a stupid song. And I think, we talk a lot about cards in a more mechanical sense, talking about the floor and the ceiling of how effective is this card in a game of Magic. I think when we're looking at these cards, we can do a sort of similar evaluation of what is the floor and ceiling of the fun. And if I'm really just stone-faced, like I'm going to sing a song and I'm just going to make it happy birthday and I'm going to sing it totally monotone and not try and ham it up and have a good time with it, that's not a great experience. There's a
For
pretty
you
low...
or the person watching you, it's going to
there's
be
a
awkward for
pretty
them too.
low floor to land aid. But the ceiling is really, really high. So when you play it in that kind of situation, and I think that's a great example where just like a couple of these cards end up in that wacky draft, it really has a high ceiling of just really exciting moments.
Yeah, that was the right amount of uncards for me. Is like we're doing the 40-person wacky draft, and there's 6 unpacks of various sets at the table. That's always felt right. The full unstable draft, I don't know. Well, I'm sure we'll get to other cards that are less about like the jokey joke aspects of it, and more about just like stuff you just can't do in Magic that doesn't fit into one of these other categories. But that is more what those drafts feel about to me.
And that is exactly what I want to talk about next. So there's this whole category of cards that really aren't, leaning into the jokes and the flavor of it, but are just about what are things you can do mechanically that don't work with the rules of Magic, but kind of seem intuitive or explore a different new space. And I think this is where both just a lot of cards fall into, and a lot of the cards that I find really interesting fall.
And especially in Unstable, the most recent unset, I feel like a lot of these were just things that were designed in regular Magic sets that the rules committee said, like, sorry, this doesn't work. We just can't do this. Like, I know, for example, that Mark Rosewater has talked about on Drive to Work that he tried for years to get Mindslaver printed. He was like, I want a card that lets you gain control of your opponent. And the rules managers were like, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. And after years and years and years of him submitting this design, they finally figured out how to make it work in the rules, or the rules evolved enough they could actually make that work. And so I get the impression it's not uncommon behind closed doors at R&D that there's a card was designed that everyone understands how it works in Spirit, but the actual like black and white of the rules doesn't quite comport exactly correctly, and so they just have to shelve it. And I think a lot of those cards ended up in Unstable.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that flow is actually bi-directional, where some things will end up in unsets because they didn't quite work, but some things will end up being successes in unsets, and then they go on to make mutate and to print tokens into packs and make full art lands. So there's just a lot of interesting space where it kind of creates this proving ground where they can just experiment with things and figure out, is it fun enough to bend the rules to make this work?
Yeah, like Lesson and Learn, for example, reminded me a lot of Contraptions.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't work exactly the same way, but the fact that you have a second deck and you have cards that reference that second deck felt very similar.
So there's a ton of different ways that things can be broken and just not work within the rules of a regular game
Maybe you
of Magic.
animate your library. Maybe you have 4 libraries, that kind of stuff.
Those are great examples. So I just want to talk about a couple individual cards that I think are interesting. First up, I love this card, Yet Another Aether Vortex. Do you remember this one?
This is, I think, a widespread favorite amongst people that cube 1 or 2 uncards.
So it's 3 red, 5 mana for an enchantment. All creatures have haste. Players play with the top card of their libraries revealed. Non-instant, non-sorcery cards on top of a library are on the battlefield under their owner's control in addition to being in that library.
Players may no longer draw planeswalkers.
Well, you can, put planeswalkers in your graveyard.
You put them right in your graveyard.
So this is obviously a little bit challenging from a rules perspective because you have cards that are in 2 zones. Everybody's playing with the top of their library face up, and those cards are also in play. But I think it's both really interesting in that it just creates weird moments where you flip the top card of your library and, oh, it's a land. I guess I'm ramped now, and I can tap this land. And then maybe I can draw a card, and now there's another land. And like there's actually really interesting sequencing stuff that can happen. You also can have these potentially really exciting moments of, well, we both get a creature, but mine's bigger, and suddenly I have Emrakul in play for no reason because of this Aether Vortex. And then the really weird interactions, like you mentioned with Planeswalkers, where it's like, well, this is in play, but it didn't come into play, so it doesn't have loyalty counters, so I guess I just start milling my library. And I think that is all space that it can be figured out. There are definitely some edge cases where I wouldn't want to be the rules manager in charge of a standard game where this is happening, and that's why it's a silver bordered card. But in the context of a cube, you can think through it and figure out, well, there aren't really any punishing interactions, so let's put this sort of like weird redundancy for sneak attack in the cube.
Mm-hmm. That's the other option, I guess, is you could just say that all unrules disagreements are settled by the cube owner. That kind of gives you an advantage in the games, though.
Well, I think that as the cube owner, you've made a great contribution to the play group by making the cube, so that seems fair to me. Another one that I love is Staying Power. This one, I just love the simplicity. It's 2 and a white for an enchantment until end of turn. This turn effects don't end. I said it was simple, and then I stumbled on it. It's a little tricky to read. Anything that says Giant Growth says your creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. It now just gives it +3/+3 perpetually. And there's a lot of weird edge cases with things that sort of require a duration for the effects to make sense. And there's a ton of memory issues with this card. But again, like mechanically, you can figure out most of it, and there's potential for abusing it and breaking the symmetry and doing weird stuff with it. And this is definitely an example of a card that I know Mark Rosewater designed and wanted to put into a black bordered set, but for all those reasons was rejected. This is actually one that I'm going to throw into the rare pile of the new cube that I just sleeved up yesterday. And I'm curious if it ever shows up and if anyone will play this. I think especially with Planeswalkers, there's a lot of really interesting interactions.
We'll see.
It might be horrible and frustrating.
We're going to draft that cube on Saturday, so we'll find out maybe.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, let's talk about just a couple others. So Phoebe, Head of Sneak is a very cool one. It can't be blocked by creatures with flavor text. So again, that kind of fits under the other rules or other qualification of things can't care about flavor text most of the time, but it just means this creature has this like weird evasive ability that you can't have in regular Magic. It also, for 4 mana, can permanently steal target creature's text box. Some of these cards just don't sound as weird today since we've had like Mutate and all kinds of wild abilities.
Still sounds pretty weird to me. I gotta be real with you.
So Phoebe ends up
hits different,
taking all these other creatures' abilities that you can then use, and additionally, then she steals their flavor
text box.
Text. Oh, you're right. The whole text, the box, but that includes the flavor text, so she also can't be blocked by them. I mean, that's just such a cool card. Do I want to play with this card all the time? No, but is it cool? And do I want to think about it sometimes? Definitely.
This one definitely gets the little combo gears turning in your brain of like, which text boxes can I combine to do truly broken nonsense?
Absolutely. Even more so for me is Grusilda Monster Masher. Combined enchanted and equipped creatures you control have Menace, and you can has an activated ability that lets you put 2 target creature cards from your graveyard combined into 1 creature. And it sort of roughly tries to explain what combined was. But again, this is basically Mutate. It's just like, oh, this creature
has... Is this Mutate or is this...
Yeah, it's basically Mutate.
I think of it as the Brizella transform cards where you actually get to get 2 permanents and combine
It's definitely
them.
very similar to that. But those are, 2 specific cards designed to work together. But you're right, that did have the combined abilities and the combined power and toughness. So it works.
It was actually a little different. I mean, you're right. It is closer to Mutate in a lot of literal ways, but I just visually think of putting the 2 cards onto the battlefield combined and making a taller, better card.
But I can't not look at this and immediately, like you're saying, have those combo gears start turning and thinking, what are the best 2 things I can do in my cube? So this actually was in my cube very briefly. It did get cut for reasons that I'm sure we'll get to. But going through all the what is the different combinations, and I my special rule was you had to come up with a name for the monster that you made. So it was a Charging Earl of Squirrel. That's a terrible name. I'm
trying to think of a good combination right now.
Yeah, think of a good combo. So I think that this is actually the card that you've most considered putting into your cube, which is Split Screen.
It is one of 2 that I actually just ordered foils of when I saw it, and I was like, maybe someday this will go into my cube. It is not yet, but it tempts me.
It's a 4 mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, you split your library into 4 separate libraries, and if you're going to interact with your library, you choose which of your libraries you want to interact with.
Do you not also play with the top card revealed?
Oh, that could be true.
I think you do, because it basically gives you some implicit, like...
Yeah, play with the top cards of your libraries revealed.
Yeah, this card is just... It's very cool. I don't know, there's nothing else to say about it. Like, obviously, seems like multiple libraries probably would break some things, or at least be very unintuitive in some ways, but this, like, plays into all the dirtily dumb that I have fun doing, where it's like, all right, now all my draw spells are way better because I get to draw from inherent choice, and all my, like, you can pick cards up with Brainstorm from 1 or multiple libraries and then put them back on tops of other libraries.
That's wild.
It's great. It's so good.
I like the idea of playing this with Master Transmuter or something, because then every time you blink this split screen, you end up basically shuffling your deck back up, and then you get a huge Scry 3 and this like ability to control your multiple libraries.
I like playing this when you get another Aether Vortex.
That is the number 1 combo, and that I want to do at some point. I've been trying to make that combo happen so much. Not hard enough. All right, a couple others that I like here. I love Giant Fan. This is just a card that lets you move counters around. And that's the thing that I think they wanted to do in lots of different ways in different sets. But there's so many challenges with, I'm moving my loyalty counter onto my creature that has +1/+1 counters.
Yeah, we got plenty of ways to move specific kinds of counters around. Like you can move +1/+1 counters around with a myriad of cards. There's even some cards that let you move loyalty counters around. But there's not cards that just say, take a counter, put on anything else. Go ahead. Doesn't matter what kind of counter it is or where you're putting it.
And I think the combo gears are exactly kind of what sparks joy for me about these cards, like that description of it, because this card does something that you can't do in normal rules of Magic. And so as soon as I read it, I'm trying to think of what are all the things you can do with it? What are all the weird interactions that you can come up with? All right, one more I really have to mention. This one of the biggest reasons I don't put it in my cube is the illustration, but I love Magical Hacker. This is 2 for a 1/2, tiny little creature, blue mana, change the text of target spell or permanent by replacing all instances of plus with minus and vice versa until end of turn.
It's a cute little card right up until Planeswalkers were printed, and then it was broken in half.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a thing. So yeah, the worst thing you can, or the best thing you can do with Magical Hacker is you change all the little pluses on your Planeswalker to minuses or vice versa, and then you just ultimate your
Mostly the vice
Elspeth,
versa.
and then you
Mostly
have
to put 7 loyalty counters on your Planeswalker and to also get the ultimate ability, which is a pretty good little combo.
I've done this with a Johnny Vengeant in our friend's Uncube, where you're like, oh, I'll destroy all your lands, and also my Planeswalker is huge, and it's a wild thing. There are also a lot of other, outside of Planeswalkers, interesting interactions. I did consider this for my own cube briefly, which has had, on the order of 1 to 5 uncards in it at any time. It turns out it's just really, really punishing against a lot of effects that care about putting +1/+1 counters on things and pumping up all your spells. Just playing this and being like, all right, upkeep, I'll target your Phalanx Leader. And now if you trigger that, it won't put 1/1 counters on your creatures. It'll put -1 counters on all your creatures is pretty rude, but it's a super interesting card that, again, you just can't help but read it and start thinking about all the weird things you can do with it.
I think of it in cubes with a lot of Planeswalkers as one half of a Splinter Twin combo, and the other half is just any Planeswalker.
Yeah.
But it's fun because it doesn't always win you the game immediately. Instead, we'll do something nonsensical and over the top, and usually win you the game.
It'll usually win you the game. So this is definitely, again, for me, the most interesting deep vein of all the different kinds of uncards, and this is really where I'm most excited for Unfinity to see what kinds of new interesting cards that can just do wild stuff are.
You didn't mention the only other card that I have considered putting in my cube that's an uncard that I ordered a foil of when it was printed unstable. Do you want to hazard a guess?
Oh, is it Arcane Savant?
No, though I do have a foil of that one because, I guess maybe there's 3 cards I consider putting in my cube. It's not an uncard, though. It's a conspiracy card. It's not silver bordered.
We'll count it.
Sure. Arcane Savant is definitely kind of messed up and powerful. Clocknapper in a similar way. But no, the card I'm thinking of is the Grand Calcutron.
Okay, tell me more.
You did a big breath in like you had something to say about it.
I really strongly dislike that card.
The Grand Calcutron is a legendary artifact. It's white and a blue to cast, and when it enters the battlefield, each player's hand becomes a program, and a program is an ordered row of revealed cards. Players can only play the first card of their program. If a card will be put into a player's hand from anywhere, that player reveals it and places it anywhere within his or her program instead. At the beginning of each player's end step, if that player's program has fewer than 5 cards, he or she draws cards equal to the difference. Now you hate this card because it is so cool and powerful.
I hate it because I first read it and I was like, your hand becomes a program? This is amazing. I love this card. It is so cool. I played with it one time and was immediately like, this is the worst game of Magic I've ever played. I'm just getting punished left and right for making, fine decisions and just drawing cards in the wrong order. And you just want to punish people.
I like symmetrical effects, and I do have a really soft spot in my heart for stacks, for stuff that just says, sorry, you don't get to play your cards. And this does that basically, and I really like that it's a build around for decks that don't care about playing their spells in a specific order, basically.
So it's just it's a build around for just a really aggressive tempo-y blue-white deck.
This is kind of like Standstill, right? It's just a thing you play when you're ahead on board, and your rest of your cards are just going to be very predictive and straightforward, and your opponent's trying to stabilize.
And you're looking at your opponent, it's you have your removal spell second from the bottom, or second from the top, so you can't actually cast that for 2 turns. Cool, I'll just go ahead and make this play that you can't really have any control over. And
I definitely think if I were to put it in a cube, it would become unfun relatively quickly, because it is getting rid of all hidden information, which I like hidden information. It's a very important part of what makes Magic fun and interesting. It is punishing. It basically removes a bunch of decisions about sequencing and what card do you play now and when do you play it, and replaces it with very linear decisions of like, where do you put this card in your program and do you play the first card in your program? So it kind of like changes the whole decision matrix, but in a kind of novel way. But I would love to just get some reps in with this card and just see what it does. And maybe I'll just stick it in my... If I ever had a rare module in my cube, I would be tempted to stick it in there and see what, if anything, people could do with it, because it's got a very cool high ceiling. Also, aside from all this like stacksy, you don't get to play your spells in the order you want stuff, it also has very cool synergies with a lot of effects that, you know, require you to draw and discard, for example, because the cards you draw are then put into your program. And then, do you discard from your program? I don't think you do.
You do actually discard from your program. So
there's definitely a weird... I'm not going to remember it now, and I shouldn't have even started bringing it up. There's definitely cards that go way up in value because the way they put cards into your program, and then the fact that you don't have a hand anymore.
How is it? Is Brainstorm good with your program? Probably, because you draw those cards, you get to put them into your program. It's probably really busted with Brainstorm.
Do you... But then do you have to put cards from your program back on top of your deck, or do you not,
I think
because you don't have a hand anymore?
I think it does still count as your hand, because I think the first time... So I'll retcon that. I did actually enjoy this card the first time I played with it, because we were at the Crown in Baltimore. We were having a good time. And we're all like, what do we do? And just like figuring out how it worked. And I think we did play the rules wrong, and we said, well, we don't have hands anymore, so anything that says... You know, you can't Thoughtseize me anymore because I don't have a hand. And I think that's actually not how it works. I think
just say your hand becomes a program,
right, so
not
it's still
your
a hand
ceases to exist and you have a program instead.
But the second time I played with it, I did not enjoy it.
Okay, here's what it's actually good with that I'm thinking of. Sylvan Library. So it replaces the draw trigger is what it does. So anytime you would draw a card, instead you do this other thing, which is placing it into your hand. So if you have anything that... I think that's what I'm thinking of this whole time. If you have anything that like draws you cards, like in the case of Sylvan Library, those card draws are replaced by putting this card into your hand instead, so you didn't draw any cards. So when it says put 2 cards back that were drawn this turn, you had no cards drawn this turn because it was replaced. It's kind of like Sylvan Library in Abundance, right? Is that the combo I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Where you can just name those cards and get them all into your hand.
Okay, so I'm back on board. I want to see your Bant Stacks deck exactly one time.
All right.
And then I'm off.
I can make that happen for you.
Any other cards that you think are worth talking about that just break the rules of Magic?
You know, I'm not drawn to that many uncards, I have to confess, except for these few ones we've talked about that are just very sweet. I think especially Unstable was made very much with Commander players in mind because that is how all Magic is made. Well, yes, but also because the original unsets were in a very much a pre-Commander era. So we had never seen any kind of uncards printed acknowledging Commander. Like, we didn't even mention that the Grand Calcutron has the text, can be your commander on it. So I think that was a lot of the stuff that ruled out a lot of the unstable cards for me. Not that obviously I could like commander designed cards, but they just happen to be a design with a different player's values and mentality in mind. So I can imagine uncards I would be interested in a lot more. And actually, when I start thinking about that, I really come across like the Mystery Booster playtest cards, which are in a very similar space. A lot of them have rules text that does not work in Black Border Magic, but could potentially work if it was implemented in the future. And there's a lot of Mystery Booster playtest cards that are very appealing to me. And I've considered playing them in my cube before and just decided not to because they're so ugly. I don't like the way they look. They're really
hard to look at.
So, I mean... a
lot of the sketches are very endearing, but you look at it across the table, it's a squiggle. It doesn't work for me.
I appreciate the Crave decision to make them all look like that. I think it's a bold Crave decision because they are unfinished cards, and so they should look unfinished. But just for my own aesthetic, shallow purposes, I don't really want a Frogkin Kidnapper in my cube, even though I love the card Frogkin Kidnapper and would love for them to print it someday. So, yeah, I guess of the cards that don't work in Black Border Magic, the actual uncards interest me a lot less than the Mystery Booster playtest cards, some of the conspiracy cards that I think are maybe designed with a different kind of player in mind.
So there are a couple other small categories to go over quickly. One of them is just that a lot of these cards just have flavor or creative decisions that are outside of the sort of what they deem to be the normal Magic style. So, City of Ass. It's a normal Magic card. It's in fact...
is it a normal? I thought it produced like half mana or something.
Oh, you're right.
It's not normal. Yeah, produce 1.5 mana of any color. That's not normal.
So, but it's effectively a normal card because you can't use the half mana, I guess, if you have 2 City of Asses.
Yeah.
If you have the whole butt, it works together.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Crowstorm is a better example. It's
that is a great example.
Storm
actually.
Card that just It's a storm card for 2 and a blue. Create a 1/2 bird creature token named Stormcrow, and it has Storm. So this is obviously a joke on Stormcrow, but now we have the whole storm of Stormcrows. This could absolutely be black border. Obviously, there's balancing decisions because they don't want to print storm cards that much.
Yeah, I would argue this obviously could be mechanically black border, but I think if they were having the discussion of, hey, we don't print things,
they would probably cost it.
Well, right. I'm just saying, if Mark Rosenauer was saying, hey, we're wasting a slot in Unstable on a card that could be black border, he would then have somebody rebut and say, we will never do this in black border because we cannot print a 3-mana storm payoff in black border ever again in any set. And he's like, yeah, okay, you're probably right. So Unstable it is.
And then they did it. They printed Weather the Storm.
Sure. They did do that.
So a lot of these cards, maybe Target Minotaur is another cute one. It's just, it's a little creature with prowess. And it did this thing with multiple different arts, but so that kind of just like cutesy illustration style, and the fact that it is just the Minotaur that's getting hit by all these spells. There's a lot of these cards that I think tend to be maybe more like what you would call like filler cards that are just the bread and butter limited cards that just are in unsets because, or they are not black borderable because they are just in the style that they don't want to include in black border Magic. And a big part of that also overlaps with this whole squirrel theme, how for the longest time they just didn't want to put squirrels into normal Magic sets, and so Mark Rosewater said, fine, I'm going to put squirrels where I want to. Or where I'm allowed to.
Either way, it doesn't really roll off the tongue. Kind of sounds a little odd.
I'm sorry that. So, in addition to these things that are just like purely the flavor of, the illustration, the name is a joke, it's a reference, it's whatever. I really like some of these cards do end up having the actual mechanics be sort of a style that you just wouldn't see. Specifically, one that I absolutely adore is Earl of Squirrel. This is 6 mana for a 4/4. And it has Squirrel Link. What's Squirrel Link? Well, it's just like Life Link, only instead of whenever the creature dealing damage you get life, you get squirrels. Squirrel Link. Perfect.
And we've seen this effect with, is it Pollen Bright Wings? Is that the Selesnya aura that says whenever it deals damage, you make a bunch of tokens? So it's not that effect is even something that would be silver border. It's that you shortcutted it to the keyword Squirrel Link. That's the only problem there.
Which I think is just amazing. I love this card, and I
wish it was better.
I've said this about the other silverboard cards that were in my cube previously, that I would never cut them, and I have. So I won't say I'll never cut this from my cube, but I hope it lasts for a long time. I
wish it had haste.
Questing Earl of Squirrel is what you want,
or it was like a 3-mana 2/2 or something.
Earl of Squirrel Beast.
Like I feel like you might be looking at me and thinking, oh, this guy just cares about powerful cards. He's doing that classic Uncube players do, where they just want more powerful cards. But the reality is, I just want to play with I want the cool card to do the cool thing more. I have put Earl of Squirrel on a deck before, and what does it do? I can't cast it, I can't cast it, I can't cast it, I can't cast it. Oh my god, I finally got 6 mana, I cast it, and then it dies a Doomblade. It's like, okay, I just want this card to do the thing more, instead of just, being a joke I laugh at in my hand,
I've had success with it, but yeah, it's a 6 mana spell. It's a little tough. Last little small thing is just cards with extreme variance. So something that they don't want to do a ton of in tournament legal cards is things that are just very random, or all kinds of crazy things can happen.
So
Players
random.
Generally want to have a fair amount of control in that high level play. So a lot of cards like a box of free range goblins that just, it might make you a whole bunch of goblins, or it might not make you any goblins at all because you're just rolling dice to see how many goblins you get. Or similarly, the big idea that
it's definitely going to make you at least one goblin.
Or the big idea, which is similarly, you're just going to roll die and make a whole bunch of Brainiac tokens. A lot of these are based on dice rolling, but not all of them. But generally, there are these high variance cards, which makes sense, again, in the structure of these sets, where they want to have those high ceilings, those extreme emotional high tension moments where everything hinges on this one dice roll. That's really the kind of casual, exciting gameplay that these sets are going for, and that is just a different thing than what tournament play is all about. So I love that we have these sets so that we can explore some of that space, even though, again, personally, I'm not usually including these, but if I'm playing someone else's cube, I'm going to be delighted to have those moments.
And we could see that with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, when they brought dice rolling as a mechanic to Magic more substantially, and instead of embracing this roll big dice and you get things equal to the result, they had these sort of binned categories that more or less, for most cards, either narrowed the results down to fine effect, better effect, Sometimes you had fine effect, better effect, really good rare effect, but there wasn't really a ton of variance. There wasn't roll a d20, you get that many zombie tokens with Decayed or whatever. I'm getting my sets all confused, but you know what I mean.
Right. And we also saw just that a lot of the higher variance cards were just costed in a way that they just wouldn't see tournament play.
Right.
Which I think is
comes
almost...
back to making sure that Magic as a broad game is fun to optimize. Because it wouldn't be fun
Right,
if
yeah.
the optimal thing to do was to play your box of free range goblins deck and the finals of every Pro Tour was just decided on who rolled better on their box of free range goblins is. And that was the objectively time-traveling supercomputer correct decision to play.
We have the results. The answer is a box of free range goblins. Hey, it's a 6-drop that doesn't die to Doomblade.
Well, it might. A sixth of the time it does.
All right, so I have one other sort of bonus category, which is Draft Matters cards. So these are cards from the Conspiracy sets which care about the actual draft mechanic and do something during the draft. And interestingly, these are black-bordered and totally legal. You can put Polyano the High City in your vintage deck if you want.
Mm-hmm.
It says land. Enters the battlefield on it.
Gets wastelanded is the problem.
But they just don't function because there are no high-level tournament plays that are drafts of Conspiracy sets, nor are there, any drafts. There's no cube draft at high level, so you're not going to be seeing these cards.
Rip.
I think they are pretty interesting, though. For me, one of the things that I really enjoy about Cube is, I enjoy the draft portion of the Cube almost as much as the actual gameplay. And I think a lot of Cube players feel similarly, where actually getting to construct the deck and open the pack and see what you're going to get is a really exciting moment. And so adding more gameplay mechanics to that part of the game makes perfect sense to me. In practice, there are really just a couple that stand out as pretty interesting to me. And the biggest reason is a lot of these can be a little bit disruptive. And again, I think the important thing is just what kind of atmosphere you're looking for. If the draft is all about the table talk and everyone's chatting and, this is still in the pack and wow, this card's wild, then you can just push that further. But a card like Polyano the High City, where it's a land that asks you and each of the players drafting to your left and right to choose a color, and it taps for those 3 colors. I find that just to be surprisingly disruptive when I'm trying to focus on the decisions I'm making in my draft.
Name a color, Anthony. Hey, name a color. Name a color.
What are you talking
about? What's the color going to do
so
for you
I'm trying
again?
to figure out exactly. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what does that choice
Name
mean.
white. Say white. Why would I say white? What's going on?
So for me, I'm usually trying to draft in a way where I want to focus on my own draft experience, and that doesn't really work for me, but I definitely see a lot of players play with and enjoy those. And there's a lot of interesting variations on those type of effects where you get to, make guesses about your opponent's next pick or get to see your opponent's next pick. So that's there if that's appealing. The one that I'm most interested in, and I actually love this card, is Cogwork Librarian. This is, it doesn't matter what it does because you're never going to put it in your deck.
Not most environments. You can imagine a low-powered cube where that could be your 24th card.
All right, and if you're going to play it in Vintage, what it'll do is be a 4-mana 3/3. You draft it face up, and whenever you're drafting in the future, you can put Cogwork Librarian back in the pack and take 2 cards from the pack. So you're still passing the pack with the right number of cards, but you've gotten to make 2 choices. And this is a blast. It's not at all disruptive because you don't have to interact with anybody else. You draft it face up, and you say you're doing that, and people will ignore it or whatever. But it just adds this little mini game to the draft where, because you're putting it back in the pack, someone else can draft it again. And I've seen this go in and out of packs a dozen times during a draft. It's incredibly powerful. It's a lot of fun to take it early and be able to get a double pick from a fresh pack. And I love this card.
Yeah, that's, I think, by far the best designed Draft Matters card for all the reasons you mentioned. Some of the other ones I would like, except for the fact that they do mess with the number of cards in the pack. And that, to me, adds to confusion. It's like people think they've messed up a pack somehow when they get 2 packs with 3 cards in a row or something. They're like, something went wrong, when actuality it was like a Draft Matters card. So I really like it as well. I think it does add a cool layer to the draft. And I like that our playgroup's been playing it in your cube for a long time, and we are still somewhat split on its power level. I think most people agree it's a very high pick, but people will snap it off in weird moments and, disagree on how good a mid-pack 3 Cogwork Librarian is. So I like that it's not deterministic. It's not clearly overpowered.
Right. I guess another way to sort of describe the kinds of fun interactions that it adds to the draft table is they're very much opt-in. If you care about it and somebody's saying, here comes the Cogwork Librarian. I sure hope nobody takes it, so I actually get to have it for the next pack. And then the person just next to you takes it, and so it starts moving, and it's going to start moving in the other direction in the next pack and just move away from you. Like, those are really fun interactions that I love, that kind of table talk. But if you're serious about your draft and you want to just ignore that and not pay attention to the shenanigans that are happening, you are totally allowed to do that.
Well, if you're serious about your draft, you should probably be taking Cogwork Librarian if you have the chance to.
Right. Well, you're hoping to, and you're just crossing your fingers. You're just goading your opponents not to take it.
There was that memorable draft where Daniel and I just passed it back and forth the entire draft. He picked it pack 1, then you put it back into pack 1, take a double pick, and then he passed it immediately to me, and I immediately took it. And then the next pack, I passed it to him, and then he passed it back to me, pack 3, and then I passed it back to him. It was great. So good.
I love it. There's another sort of variation on, or another whole sort of draft mechanic, which is, we mentioned Arcane Savant and Volatile Chimera. These are both just creatures that basically let you use your draft picks and then either exile those cards or set them aside. I guess they're not really in exile. And then either when it enters the battlefield, you get to cast a spell, or it can become a copy of that creature with an activated ability. So it's like, both are cheat cards, one for spells, one for creatures. But again, they're almost like companions in a way that you always sort of get the second half of the combo baked in. You don't have to draw both halves.
Yeah, I really like these cards in their design. I think Volatile Chimera, I think, is a fantastic additional support card if you are playing Sneak Attack, Reanimator, other kinds of creature cheat decks. I think it's a really great redundancy for that kind of deck.
Well, the problem there is you don't actually get to put those cards in your deck.
That doesn't stop it from being redundancy for those effects, though. You can still have...
If you just have excess, you don't need that many targets.
Right, I just mean
totally.
Like, it's an environment where you can already use big giant creatures that you can't cast,
right.
And this is another way to use those big giant creatures. Even in a deck that doesn't necessarily have them inside of it, you can just put it in your aggro deck and
so
then
it's
have a
like,
6-drop in your sideboard or whatever. It does have a little bit of randomness involved. You just have to draft 3 targets that are reasonable for it. Arcane Savant is kind of extremely, extremely powerful, which is the thing that keeps me from being excited about actually cubing it. But I think both these cards are very much in line with most people's cube design strategies and goals. Whether or not the actual balance of the cards is appropriate is another question. But I've always thought that Volatile Chimera specifically was woefully underplayed. You actually see Arcane Savant in a fair number of high-powered cubes. People are willing to say, yeah, this is a enter the battlefield time warp or whatever, or enter the battlefield upheaval, or enter the battlefield whatever big spell you want to stick under there. But you don't see Volatile Chimera in a lot of cubes, and I think it has a good place in any kind of environment supporting creature cheat strategies.
Maybe people just really are scared of that, you pick one of the 3 at random effect.
That's just the same as a game. You draw one of your random 3 reanimator targets that you discard and then reanimate, so it's the whole thing. How many one more small things do you have? Because this has been like the 6th time you're like, one last little thing.
That's it? That was my one last little thing?
You were about to say something else. You're lying.
No.
What were you going to say?
No.
Say your last little thing. Come on, you got to do it.
There are, of course, the conspiracies from both the conspiracy sets as well, which are another just sort of like weird, wacky mechanic that doesn't function in normal Magic, but works great in Cube. I'd say works great. It's a intense mechanic.
I mean, I really like them in that they're very much like the original companions, in that a lot of them give you some benefit requiring you to draft around it or draft to some limitation or build your deck to some limitation. And I think when everybody has access to it, or you're very likely to have access to it, like you've got a cube with 16 conspiracies in it and everybody's going to get one for the most part, I think it's fun. It has a unprecedented warping effect on the draft. Drafting around Sovereign's Realm or World Knit or whatever radically changes your draft picks more than any other card could conceivably do, because you always have access to this effect and it has very strict rules it makes you follow. And for that reason, the times I've played these cards in a cube, it's like I have fun playing Sovereign's Realm exactly twice, and I have fun playing World Knit exactly twice. And the third and beyond times, I'm like, I'm doing the World Knit thing again. Like, I'm just going to do this thing that totally changes my draft because I got to pack 1 and it's just the best card. And then it gets a little bit less fun, or a lot less fun.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. But I haven't played them in so long.
Maybe it's time to do it again. Just like I like to play 3 games of Commander every 5 months. Maybe once every 2 years, I want to play some Uncube. So that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. When Unfinity drops, we will surely talk about Uncards a little bit more. If you want to hear us talk more about Uncards or want to hear us talk less about Uncards, let us know so we know how much time we should dedicate to that new set when it drops in the spring. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Thanks for talking about Magic with me, Anthony.
I should have thought of an unpun.
Pun. We got to mention briefly in passing here, in closing, our buddy Josh, who owns the Uncube you and I have played the most times.
I actually got to play it just a couple weeks ago.
Oh my goodness, did you while you were down in Oklahoma? How was that?
It was fun.
Now, Josh is a dear friend, and he's known for really committing to the bit, I would say.
I think that's a good... Yeah.
Josh does not take half measures. When Josh does something, he does it 100%. And when it comes to Uncube, that means playing the most ridiculous cards you can possibly play, which I appreciated because he built the entire cube, he sleeved it all up, and we got to play with this ridiculous pile of cards that, frankly, I don't want to play that often. And so it was fun for someone else to do that work for us. Now, at some point, I know he ordered proxies of a big stack of cards that were generated by Robo Rosewater because, as I said, Josh is not a man of half measures, so if he's going to have a cube with ridiculous cards in it, they might as well be ridiculous cards that were generated by AI and just wildly all over the power level spectrum. Is the version of the cube you played the one that has Greater Bat Garden in it?
It did. I unfortunately did not get Greater Bat Garden in my sealed pool, but I did get Afrith Familiar, which is terrifying. And
Got to give us the rules text on Afrith Familiar. Can you find it? It's not going to be on Scryfall.
So this one I know I can tell you by memory. I believe it's 1 and a blue for a 2/1 flyer. ETB, destroy target permanent.
That's quite good.
And the flavor text is terrifying.
That's quite pushed. Quite pushed indeed.
So yeah, I like having a Vindicate on a 2/1 flyer. That's pretty cool. I also had, in order to cast my Afrith Familiar on turn 1, I had a Crowan Second. So this is a land. Tap, pay 1 life, add blue-green to your mana pool. It's important they made you pay that life. If that mana was spent on a creature spell, it gets +3/+3 at first strike.
Forever.
No duration.
Forever. So turn 1, you pay 1 life, drop your Afrith Familiar, destroy your opponent's land, and you have a 5/4 first strike flyer.
Yep.
In play.
You are at 19, though.
That's true. I mean, life is a resource. You got to use it or lose it, buddy.
I don't know if that's actually better or worse than Greater Bat Garden, which is, I think that might be the best card here. Greater Bat Garden is also notable. It's a land, tap, add colorless to your mana pool. Cool and great, normal.
Wastes.
3 mana, tap, add red, green, white to your mana pool. So it's jumped you by, 3 mana, and you draw a card.
Draw a card is the really offensive part. It is all colored pips, so you really got to be playing that Naya deck or lots of colorless expensive cards.
I mean, yeah, it'll work.
I'll play it in any deck. I'll
put
Greater Bat Garden in any deck. That's actually, you know what it's like? It's kind of like I guess Temple of the False God taps for no mana until you get to 5 lands, right? Which is why it's so bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was definitely an experience. Just reading these wild cards that don't make that much sense. I actually really love this cube. I would love to play it at some point, the Robo Rosewater cube. Maybe we should have on the creator to talk about
that would
this
be great, actually.
Totally normal Magic experience. There was also a draft of this done by, I think it was Loading Ready Run.
Yep.
Did you watch this?
I saw some clips of it,
The games were just hilarious. One of my favorite other lands here is Druid of Rantist. It's a land. It just has the ability, tap, target creature gets +2/+1. Again, no duration, so...
Pretty good Pendelhaven that it just goes on there forever.
Yeah, it's a really interesting project, and I think it's hilarious.